Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through what is honestly a fascinating and highly nuanced historical topic. Today, we're digging into the British colonial period in India, specifically looking at the years between 1757 and 1947. This era left behind a deeply complex legacy. It's kind of like a giant puzzle, and we're going to explore how, even within a very rigid and unequal imperial system, certain British individuals made choices that actually transcended colonial goals. They ended up leaving verifiable, lasting, and positive impacts on the Indian subcontinent.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to picture a truly staggering number, 1,700. At the absolute height of the British Raj, roughly between 1900 and the 1930s, the total British civilian and military population in India was only about 150,000 to 250,000 people. But they were governing a nation of over 300 million. To put that into perspective, that is a ratio of roughly one British citizen for every 1,700 Indians. This right away establishes the vast systemic inequality of the whole colonial setup. You see, the Raj didn't rely on massive numbers of British settlers. It relied on an elaborate administrative system, strategic alliances, and a very strict racial hierarchy.
So, to make sense of all this history, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with the colonial context, then check out the political reformers, move to the builders and healers, explore the champions of culture, and finally wrap it all up with a nuanced legacy.
All right, part one, the colonial context. Systemic reality versus individual agency.
To really understand this, we need to impartially hold two competing truths at the exact same time. On one side, we have the systemic reality of colonialism. This was built on political domination, extreme economic extraction, shutting down indigenous industries, and making famines and poverty so much worse. These injustices are the undeniable, harsh bedrock of the period. But on the flip side, we have individual agency, because history is made by real humans, not just faceless, monolithic empires, right? Within this very unequal power structure, certain British officials, missionaries, and engineers made genuine choices. Sometimes they even directly opposed imperial interests to dedicate their lives to social reform, science, and the actual welfare of Indian communities. Moving right along to Section 2, the political reformers, challenging the empire from within.
Let's kick this off with Allan Octavian Hume. Now, Hume was a British civil servant with the East India Company. But in a pretty fascinating twist of history, after he retired, he chose to stay in India. He actually became the primary organizer and co-founder of the Indian National Congress in Bombay way back in 1885. Now, historians definitely debate his motives. Was he just trying to create a constitutional safety valve to manage Indian discontent, or did he have genuine sympathy for Indian self-rule? But honestly, whatever his initial motive was, the result is undeniable. Hume helped create the very organization that, under later leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, ultimately negotiated India's independence in 1947. Next up, we have two incredible mini-narratives about individuals who completely identified with the colonized people they lived among. First is Charles Freer Andrews. He was an Anglican priest who became so dedicated to the Indian cause that he formally resigned from his mission so he could work entirely independently. He formed a super close friendship with Mahatma Gandhi, campaigned successfully to abolish the terrible Indian indentured labor system overseas, and was even affectionately given the title Dinabandhu, which means friend of the poor. Then we have Sister Nivedita, who was originally born Margaret Elizabeth Noble in Ireland. After meeting Swami Vivekananda, she completely renounced her British identity. I mean, a total 180. She adopted Indian dress, lived right there among ordinary communities, and established schools for girls in Calcutta, becoming a massive champion for women's education and Indian cultural nationalism. Let's move to our third section and see how this builds. Builders and healers. Infrastructure and science. Just look at the work of civil engineer Sir Arthur Cotton. He was deeply distressed by the horrific Godavari famine of 1832. So Cotton actually fought back against official colonial resistance to prioritize life-saving irrigation projects over spending money on the military. He designed the massive Godavari barrage, which was completed in 1852. And this engineering marvel literally transformed drought-vulnerable regions into incredibly fertile, multi-crop agricultural zones. Because he was so fiercely dedicated to preventing famine, Cotton is still revered in villages across Andhra Pradesh today. There are literally statues standing in his honor as the genius who turned the district's green.
Now, shifting gears to science. Public health crises, especially malaria, were absolutely devastating both Indian and British populations at the time. Let's look at Ronald Ross, a surgeon in the Indian Medical Service. In 1897, while doing research in his lab in Secunderabad, Ross made a monumental breakthrough. He discovered that the Anopheles mosquito is what actually transmits the malaria parasite to humans. This was a total game changer. It earned him the Nobel Prize in 1902, paved the way for modern mosquito control, and has saved millions upon millions of lives globally, especially in India.
And you simply can't talk about healers without bringing up Waldemar Haffkine. He was a Ukrainian Jewish bacteriologist working under the British. When the bubonic plague was just ravaging Bombay in the late 1890s, Haffkine worked non-stop to develop a vaccine. In a story of just incredible personal bravery, in 1897, he actually tested this brand new plague vaccine on himself first to prove it was safe before giving it to volunteers in Dharavi. His mass vaccination campaigns saved tens of thousands of lives, and his research lab in Mumbai, it's still operating today as the Haffkine Institute. Which brings us to Section 4, Champions of Culture, Preserving Heritage and Wildlife. And this quote brilliantly illustrates a really profound intellectual shift. It's from Sir William Jones, a judge and linguist who founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Way back in 1786, he declared, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin." By hypothesizing that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin all shared a common ancestral language, Jones basically founded modern comparative linguistics. His translations brought classical Indian literature to the global stage and radically changed how the Western world viewed the immense depth and sophistication of Indian civilization.
We also see immense dedication when it comes to education and text preservation. Take David Hare, for instance. He was a Scottish watchmaker who moved to Calcutta and spent his entire personal fortune to co-found Hindu College in 1817. He was totally driven by a commitment to secular, scientific education, and his work really helped ignite the massive intellectual awakening known as the Bengal Renaissance. Meanwhile, over at Oxford, you had the German-born scholar Max Muller. Working closely with British institutions, he dedicated his whole career to editing and publishing the Rig Veda in 6 volumes. He made one of humanity's oldest literary texts accessible and preserved it for global scholars.
Now, this brings us to one of the most wildly fascinating contrasts within a single person, Jim Corbett. Born in the Kumon Hills and totally fluent in local dialects, Corbett started out as a legendary hunter. He protected highly vulnerable rural communities by tracking and killing 33 man-eating tigers that were terrorizing villages. But as he watched the habitat destruction threatening these magnificent animals, he went through a passionate transition. He literally traded his rifle for a camera and became a massive advocate for conservation. He was instrumental in creating India's very first national park in 1936, which is now named Jim Corbett National Park, specifically to protect the exact same tigers he used to hunt. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a nuanced legacy, holding competing truths.
Take a look at this timeline. 1784, the Asiatic Society. 1852, the Godavari Barrage. 1885, the Indian National Congress. 1936, Corbett National Park. The impacts of these specific individuals were not just temporary blips in history. They weren't abstract concepts. These institutions, infrastructures, and preserved lands actually survived the end of the colonial era. They continue to actively serve and enrich the lives of millions of people in India today. Notice the sheer breadth of contributions mapped out here. We're talking everything from political administration to heavy engineering infrastructure, from groundbreaking medical science to environmental conservation. It perfectly summarizes the verifiable good achieved by these specific historical outliers. They operated in completely different fields, yet they all used their individual agency to leave a legacy that outlasted the very empire they worked under.
So, the absolutely crucial point to take away is this. Acknowledging the individual good done by people like Ross, Cotton, or Sister Nivenita does not erase or excuse the systemic bad of colonialism. The extraction, the famines, the racism, that all still happened. A balanced historical perspective demands that we hold 2 competing truths in our heads simultaneously, without ever romanticizing the empire. It requires us to evaluate the genuine, brave choices individuals made while navigating deeply unequal power structures. It teaches us the vital skill of historical contextualization.
And that leads us to our final big thought for today. How do we actually judge a complex history? If history isn't just a final verdict, but an ongoing conversation between the past and the present, how do we weigh the devastating impact of a massive colonial system against the life-saving, culture-preserving actions of individuals caught within it? I really want you to think deeply about this. Look beyond the simple narratives, examine the nuance of human agency, and keep asking those difficult questions. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.